Let's talk about Shila a little bit, even though we said we were going to talk about the second training today, because Shila is like the container for all the trainings. Shila means ethic, but we should not translate it as morality, because when you say morality, there are a lot of cultural concepts around it, but maybe ethics is the best word in English to capture the meaning of Shila, or in Tibetan, Thubten, which is very different from our concepts of morality. And there are a lot of ethics. Some of them are actually totally man-made, and they do not respond to the timeless true love, compassion, wisdom. But maybe ethic here means ahimsa, non-violence. And this is the ethic that Buddha talked about. Unless you have taken certain ordinations like Bhikshuni and Bhikshu, then that's all totally different. But as a Dharma practitioner, usually the ethic in this case refers to the ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-violence. And this is why every morning when we wake up, in the Buddhist tradition, we recite this verse, which really captures the first training. Let me recite this in Tibetan. I shall not commit any unwholesome. I shall cultivate all the wholesome. I shall tame my mind. This is the way of the awakened one. So this verse basically reminds you to practice the first training, which is non-violence, ahimsa. Ahimsa means not to harm others, as long as you are conscious, as long as you are aware. Of course, sometimes we end up harming others without any intention, beyond our control, but as long as you have the awareness, as long as you are conscious, and then you might like to hold very strong commitment to not harm any living being, not just the human beings, but all living beings. And this is why kind of interesting, and that nowadays you have Buddhist militants in this world, and who are actually causing wars and violence and genocide in the name of defending Buddha Dharma. But this is totally contradictory, because the very first training and the Buddha's teaching is non-violence, that we're not supposed to harm anybody, any living being. Of course, especially human beings. We're not supposed to harm them with our thoughts, with our words, with our deed, as long as we are aware of it. Of course, there are many moments that we are not very conscientious, we are not aware of. We may end up harming others without any kind of negative intention, without hatred, without selfishness. But as long as we are very conscientious, the first training ethic is really not to harm any other living beings. Human beings are the first beings that we don't want to cause any kind of harm or pain. And then we are also encouraged to not harm all sentient beings, all the living beings that has a consciousness, that has sense, that has a feeling, which is a very interesting, of course, a theory, because there was a debate, huge debate, like ongoing debate between the Jainism and the Buddhism about whether trees have a consciousness or not. It said that the Jainism, the followers of Mahavira, are like the ultimate practitioners of ahimsa, to the extent that they believed that trees and plants do possess consciousness, and they were very careful about hurting them, whereas the Buddhists somehow end up believing that trees and plants do not possess of a consciousness. So that's another debate which we don't have to get into. But well, as long as you feel that something possess consciousness, then we are encouraged to be very sensitive, conscious, not to harm them, not just the people, but the animals and insects and anything that possess consciousness. Sometimes it's difficult for us to be very sensitive about the life around us. Like when we look around, like let's think about insects. We really don't sometimes think so much about them because they are kind of insignificant, and then there are all these tiny creatures. We somehow don't pay attention to them, and this is why there is a vegetarianism in the especially Mahayana Buddhist practice. Buddha himself wasn't vegetarian. He ate whatever people offered. He walked with many monks and nuns with his begging bowl. He ate everything, whatever people offered. It doesn't matter who offered the food, either aristocrats and noble people or homeless or poor family. He transcended all the preferences and received whatever people gave him as an act of generosity. And Buddha wasn't vegetarian, but in Mahayana tradition, and there's very strong practice of vegetarianism, and this vegetarianism comes into being from two ideas. The first idea that every living being has a Buddha nature. This is one reason. Second reason is this concept that eating meat can cause harm to other living beings, animals. Of course, I'm not trying to encourage you to become vegetarian. That's totally a personal choice. I'm a vegetarian right now. It's not so much that I become vegetarian because I want to be pure or wholesome or holy, but I become vegetarian. I'm not a really excellent vegetarian. I'm not a very rigid vegetarian, but I'm kind of vegetarian. You might like call fake vegetarian. So anyway, I'm not trying to encourage you to become vegetarians. As long as maybe you're conscientious, just it's good to hold in our mind that whatever we do have an impact on lives of other living beings. So ahimsa, non-violence, Buddha wasn't just telling ahimsa in relationship to human beings. He wasn't saying that our ahimsa, non-violence practice is only in relationship to human beings, but in relationship towards all sentient beings, including animals, cows, deer, pigs, chicken, insects, everything that possess consciousness. So that's what really ahimsa is. And we can practice ahimsa through our mind by not holding negative thought towards others, ill will, hatred, judgment, and also we can practice ahimsa through our words, not to say things that can really hurt somebody's feeling, that can cause like self-doubt or sense of being insulted. And then also practice, of course, ahimsa, non-violence through our actions, and not to harm anybody through our deeds. And this is really what Dharma is. This is what the Shila is, not to harm others. And there's this idea in the Buddhist tradition that if you can practice ahimsa, then forget the whole path. And we will go through this text by Gyasi Tomebzon. He said, if you can practice this Shila, ahimsa, he said, then it's almost laughable to think that you're going to be bodhisattva and help others, something like that. So anyway, we all would like to try our best to practice ahimsa as much as possible, non-violence. Non-violence is really what we need. We need the non-violence as a humanity. Everybody should be practicing nonviolence to the best of their ability. The whole world should be practicing nonviolence towards each other, and then the world will be a much better place for not just one group of people, but for whole humanity, since all human beings are our brothers and our sisters, regardless of their religion, their ethnicity, and their culture. And yet, sometimes we forget practice in nonviolence, which we see even in today's world. I mentioned briefly a little bit, and there are countries who identify themselves as a Buddhist country, but then they are not very kind towards the minorities, the ethnics, because they don't practice Buddhism. So we should actually raise those issues in our Buddhist circles, and to say this is not okay, this is not what Buddha taught, this is not the way of ahimsa, nonviolence. And just remember that without ahimsa, all our spiritual path is incomplete. It won't take us anywhere. So we have to regard all our spiritual practices as like nectar. And then to regard the ahimsa, which is the really true shila, true ethics, is like the container. But if there's no container, if the container is broken, then you can't hold the nectar. You can't drink the nectar. So there's no really dharma, there's no path without the ahimsa, without the non-violence.